Good day, everyone. So today we will be talking about communication, process, principles, and ethics. In this lesson, students will be able to expose the different ways of looking at communication. It should give students a good understanding of why communication should be studied at the tertiary level and potential of such a course in helping them transform themselves and their society. So in this lesson, it will include communication models that students can use in the future, and it will also include ways on how to explain why communication tasks in the past have either failed or succeeded. It is a good introduction to the different processes, principles, ethics, and other dimensions of communication that students should be aware of when they start communicating in the academe or in the professional world. So by the end of this lesson, students should be able to understand the meaning and the importance of communication in our society and to know the different principles, processes, and ethics of communication as embodied in the communication models provided. And last but not the least, relate communication models to their experiences and apply them to their own communication processes. So let us first have the definition of communication. So what is communication in the first place? No, so there are few words that we can associate communication with. There are few words that have many meanings, just like communication. The term can refer to everything from messages on our t-shirts to presidential speeches to our blogs to our vlogs, from computer codes to other nonverbal communication. Communication has been the professional concern of philosophers, scientists, poets, politicians, and entertainers, to name a few. Amidst this diversity, the origin of the word communication is communicare or communis, which means to impart, to participate, to share, or to uh, common. Okay, so typically refers to the process of transmitting knowledge, ideas, information, attitudes, feelings, and the like. If we consult dictionaries and other sources of information, there will be numerous meanings, but the essence is only one: the exchange of or transmission of messages. So in this slide, I'd like you to observe what is in the picture. It says here, my words came out fine. They were processed incorrectly by your brain. So it talks about communication, although what is relayed is perceived differently. And that is also another thing that we should consider whenever we are communicating with someone. And that will be part of our lesson as well. Let's proceed with the next one. What can you observe in this picture? So we have two people talking with each other. The first one says, "Do you even hear the words I say?" And the other one, "The ones I like." Okay, so this is another example of communication, and we can also observe here that there is a difference between what is relayed and what was perceived. So that is another thing that we will talk about in this discussion. Let's proceed with the next one. We have another picture here that says communication must be hot. That is honest, open, and two-way. Okay, and this one pertains to different principles of communication and models of communication, which we are going to talk about in the next few slides. And as I mentioned a while back, there are different definitions of communication for us to further understand what communication means. Let's proceed with the next slide. So we have here communication as defined by various authors. First one, Keith Davis. Communication is a process of passing information and understanding from one person to another. We have John Adair. Communication is essentially the ability of one person to make contact with another and make himself or herself understood. And we have William Newman and Charles Summer. Communication is an exchange of ideas, facts, opinions, or emotions of two or more persons. So definitely we have the same ideas here, that is exchanging of ideas, feelings, emotions, and whatever it is that we have in our mind. Let's have another definitions of communication by other authors. We also have here Lewis Allen. Communication is a bridge of meaning. It involves a systematic and continuous process of telling, listening, and understanding. We also have another definition by Peter Little. Communication is a process by which information is transmitted between individuals and or organizations so that an understanding response result. And last but not the least, we have Murphy, Hildebrandt, and Thomas. Communication is the process of transmitting and receiving verbal and non-verbal messages. It is considered effective when it achieves the desired response or reaction from the receiver, and not just like those few pictures that I have shown you a while back, where the desired response was not received by the sender. So basically, there could be a barrier in communication that took place in those examples that I have shown you in the pictures. So this time, let us proceed with the different processes of communication. How does communication takes place? And what are the things that we should know as individuals about communication? So communication is a two-way process involving the following elements: a sender, a message, medium, channel, receiver, a response, and feedback. Although there are still other elements of communication that we will have to consider later on. However, it is not sufficient to have just all these elements. There should be cooperation and understanding between the two parties involved. So we also have context. Okay, so it is important to have a common frame of reference or context. That's what I'm trying to talk about for successful and meaningful communication. Example, a common language or a common interpretation of gesture. So there will be a lot of miscommunication or misunderstandings if there is no common language and no common interpretation of gesture. Okay, so let's say for instance, you are referring to a particular idea, but they interpreted it differently, then it may lead to miscommunication. Let's proceed. The components of communication process. So first one, we have the idea, or the stimulus or impulse that arises in the sender's mind. So when we say idea, it is not yet the message. It's just the idea of the sender. Okay. Next, formal expression of the idea or impulse using a medium and channel. That's the part that the sender is already thinking about it and coding what to say later on. Okay, this is the time when, let's say, the sender or someone who is thinking about a subject is already constructing his or her sentences, the words that they're going to use, and so on. Next, interpretation of the message by the receiver, decoding. So we have the decoding process here. So when we say decoding, the receiver or the other person listening or hearing from the sender will have to try to interpret, will try to understand, think about what is relayed to him or her by the sender. We also have our next component, reaction or response. So this is also a feedback, if you may consider. Conveying the reaction response in the feedback using a medium or a channel. So when we convey our ideas, our message, and also feedback, it should be in a particular medium. Is it through text? Is it through picture? Is it through nonverbal communication means? Is it through verbal communication means? So these are what they call medium. And number 6, decoding of the feedback received. So since the receiver already have his or her interpretation of the message and provided already a response, then the original sender of information will also try to receive the feedback coming from the original receiver. Let's proceed. So still under the process of communication. So essentially communication involves the sender or the communicator and the receiver. Both should necessarily share a mutually accepted code. Most of the time, a common language, a common context. The context, speaking, in which the communication takes place is called communication environment. The content of the code is sent in a certain medium, okay? May it be oral, may it be written, or non-verbal. When we say oral or written, the use of words. When we say non-verbal, the use of others other than words. Let's say pictures, videos, gestures, facial expressions. These are what they call non-verbal cues or non-verbal communication. Using channels, okay, in the form of encoded messages. So is that through phone, is that through telephone, email, or is that face-to-face? Is that through Microsoft Teams, Google Classroom, and so on? No? The code is not restricted to only language. It may also involve the use of costumes, gestures, colors, among other things, because wearing a costume, wearing your OOTD or outfit of the day may also give a message to other people. No? Your gestures, your facial expressions, the way you act will also give meaning, will also give a message to other person. The way you stand up may also give another meaning to others. Okay, so there are different ways of communicating our ideas. So this time let us proceed with the aspects of communication. So we have here communication is integrated in all parts of our lives. Communication meets needs. Communication is guided by culture and context. Communication is learned. Communication has ethical considerations or ethical implications, which is also part of our discussion for today. Okay. So, but before we proceed with the aspects of communication, once again, let us have a review, a recap of the process of communication. So we have here the sender or the generator of idea, okay? Or in other words, he is or she is the speaker, okay? The next one, the idea or the message. Idea is converted into words, pictures, sound, symbols, or action. Next, encoded idea is transmitted to the receiver. So, nung una, iniisip pa lang nung sender. But when we say encoded idea, it is the idea already transmitted, received by the receiver. Receiver, on the other hand, is another element of communication. Receives the encoded message through the senses and perceives it in the mind. Okay, receiver decodes or converts the messages back into meaningful ideas in his own mind. Okay, so these are the different elements. These are the processes of communication. Okay. So factors affecting communication. First factor that affects communication definitely will be the communicator or the sender. Other term for communicator or sender will be speaker. He is the person who creates and transmits the message by means of his voice or body or both. In other words, he forms the messages and attempts to communicate them to others through verbal symbols or non-verbal symbols or non-verbal behaviors. He may also be called, once again, the source as well, the encoder as well. So communicator, sender, speaker, source, encoder, these are synonymous with each other. Next, we have a message. Okay, let's say greeting someone happy birthday or thinking about the different lessons that you're going to teach someone or the things that you have in mind. These are the message. So message is the element transmitted in communication. It may consist of the idea, the opinion, information, feelings, emotion, attitude, or skill. These meanings are transmitted by the use of, once again, both verbal or non-verbal symbols. Symbols are words, it could be sounds, it could be actions that represent a specific content meaning. Okay, so if you want to give someone or share someone a specific message, that is not limited to verbal cues, no? So we have a lot of ways to send a message to someone. So as someone speaks, they may choose words to convey their meaning. At the same time, facial expressions, eye contact, gestures, and tone of voice all are nonverbal cues, accompany your words, and also affect the meaning your listener receives from the symbols you use. So if we will combine both verbal and nonverbal cues in communicating our messages, then it will be more effective because they can hear it from you, but at the same time, they will see nonverbal cues, emphasizing what you are trying to tell that person. Okay, for instance, the message is that you are angry with someone. So let's say you told them how angry you are, but at the same time you will use non-verbal cues. Let's say your facial expressions uh, indicate that you are indeed angry, no? Or you have your closed fist, so as your hand gesture. Okay, your tone of voice is different from normal. So these are nonverbal cues that will enhance, will emphasize the message that you want someone to learn about or receive. Let's proceed. Another factor affecting communication, or another element of communication, is channel. Okay, so through channel, we'll be able to communicate, connect with someone, no? So kagaya na nakalagay dito sa first picture natin on the left side of our screen, those people are being connected with lines, and we may consider those lines as our channel. They are connected with each other because of channel. So this is the pathway through which the message travels to reach its destination. The channel may be oral, visual, or audiovisual. The language the speaker uses in sending the message is oral. When he uses his body language, writes on the board, or presents illustration, his medium is visual. Just like posters, just like drawings, just like billboards. These are all examples of visual channel. Motion pictures, films, videos, stage plays all make audiovisual methods to make communication more effective. Next, we also have treatment of message. What do you mean by treatment of message? How someone decoded the message received. If you will remember in the first few slides, in the picture I have shown you, the other person asks, or the sender asks the receiver, can you even understand what I'm talking about? And the receiver says, yes, I can understand the things that I want to understand. So another factor that affects communication is how someone treated or decoded the message that they have received. Okay, so that will also affect communication. So make sure whenever we are communicating with someone, we should know um, the reason behind why they are saying something. We should verify, we should think critically in order for us to receive the information provided to us as accurate as possible. Okay, next, let's proceed. So the next one is the audience or the receiver. Other term for receiver will be the decoder or the listener as well. He is the one who receives, analyzes, understands, and interprets the message. That is, he processes the messages and behaviors he receives and reacts to them. So, for instance, teacher and the students. So, in that particular, in most cases, the audience or the receiver will be the students, and the sender, the speaker, will be the teacher. In how about in social media? Let's say YouTube influencers will be the sender or the speaker or the source, and the intended audience, viewers, are the receivers. Let's proceed. Another factor affecting communication and another element of communication will be feedback, okay, or audience response. So this is the return process in communication in which the communicants give both verbal and non-verbal signals to show whether the message is understood or not. So let's say yung pagkunot ng noo, yung pagtango, pag yes or no, or may it be verbal affirmation. So that is feedback. Okay, so when someone asks you to do something and you gave them a facial expression, that might be a feedback to them, realizing whether you like to do it or not. So feedback may either be positive or negative. Okay, so let's say when someone says I love you, so they may have a feedback of whether they will say I love you back or not, or we're good as friends, something like that. So it is positive if it inspires you to go on with the talk. Smiling, for example, nodding of your head, clapping of your hands. What else? Attractive listening are examples of feedback. Okay. When someone frowns at you after you made a remark, knits his forehead, or nagkunot ng noo, or does something else other than listening, he is discouraging you to continue your communication. Let's say, for instance, you talk with someone and they look away, or their body faces the other way, and they showed you their back, so probably they don't want to communicate, they don't want to talk with you. So these signals may mean that he is not interested or do not want you to say anything else. So this element, feedback, is very important in communication process. Why? Through feedback, one is able to correct, explain, and clarify his point. It may be useless to continue talking if the audience reaction is negative. So as communicators, as individuals, we should be keen enough to observe the feedback of the person we are trying to talk. We should be keen enough to observe the different non-verbal cues that they are trying to tell us. So just like what is written here, so accept or rejection. So that these are forms of feedback. When you applied for a work, it is be keen enough to observe if they want you or they will be rejecting your application. So mental and physical actions are also cues for us to know the feedback of someone. Remembering and forgetting, and right versus wrong. So another element of communication, which is another factor of affecting communication, is noise. May it be internal or external noise. So when we say noise, it refers to anything that interferes with or hinders the transmission or reception of the message. So when someone tried to transmit or someone tried to receive it, there is a noise. When someone tries to encode it, when someone tries to decode the message, there is also a noise. And this is a very big factor in the communication process. And as individuals, as learners, as professionals in the future, we should make sure that we identify the different barriers in communication and try to minimize these barriers of communication. Because if not, then it will lead to a lot of miscommunications. It will lead to unproductive communication, unproductive things that you might have done properly at work. So noise refers to, once again, um, anything that interferes the reception and transmission of the message. Noise may either be physical or psychological. When we say physical, there are while you are talking with someone, you can hear noises in the background. That is physical. Okay, or um, if someone is deaf, then that is also physical barrier. Okay, or you when at class you are discussing something with your classmates, but there are people also trying to talk at the same time, that is physical noise or physical barrier. Okay, so other examples of physical noise will be footsteps going up and down the stairs, dogs barking, insects biting you during a lecture. Okay, so that's what we call physical noise. On the other hand, when we say psychological noise, that can be your problems, your worries, your anxieties, your prejudices, your biases during the communication process. So psychological, all in your mind. Let's say someone is talking about a particular idea. Let's say that person is talking about something positive about a particular politician. And since you are biased against that politician, you don't want to receive, or you are treating it lightly, you are treating the message negatively. So that is another factor affecting communication. So my tip, let us be open-minded whenever someone is sharing their ideas, so that our thoughts will not be clouded, will not be limited to the things that we only want to hear, we only want to believe, because they might be looking at things differently. So why not open your mind to things, to look at things differently as well. So characteristics of feedback. So intentional, specific, description, usefulness, timeliness, clarity, validity, and reliability, and readiness. So with the noise or with barriers of communication, it will definitely lead to different problems in communication. So first one is language or the code. So this is another barrier in communication, problem in communication, use of language. So we might have different languages. That's why we can't understand other people. or we might be using the same language, however, our interpretation of the language used by the other person might be different, okay? Or they may be using a particular language, however, the meaning of what is being uttered is different to how the other person decoded it. So that is one problem in communication. The other one is not paying attention or not listening to the sender or to the source. So that's also a problem, because if they are not listening, definitely they are not getting the message that the other person or the sender's, the source or the speaker is trying to say. Next, overconfidence, egoism, or complacency. So if someone is overconfident and they look at themselves higher than the other person, that will also affect how or that will also affect the process of communication, because they may not want to hear what the other person is trying to say at all. They will only listen to their own ideas. Another problem in communication is information overload. So if they are already, or let's say the receiver is already receiving a lot of information, then that is a problem for them, because they might not be receiving all the information, the messages that are coming into them. On the other hand, another problem in communication is insufficient information. Next, difference in thinking, perception, beliefs, and prejudice. Okay, I think we have already example of this a while back. Life position, essentiality of proper mindset, physical environment, inarticulateness, disorganized communication, lack of empathy, and too ahead of audience understanding. This time, to furtherly understand more about communication, let us have the different models of communication. So there are three general models of communication. We have the linear, transactional, and interactive models. And under each models, we have more specific models to discuss. Okay, so let us proceed with each of these models, because when we say models of communication, it is about one way of thinking about communication process. And by looking at these different models of communication, we'll have a better understanding of how the main elements of any structure or any process of communication have relationships with each other. So it helps in explaining by providing a simplified way information is being delivered. Professor Ramona Flores, in her book Oral Communication in Context, discusses four models of communication. In this chapter, we will discuss the three main general models of communication. Okay, so let us start with the linear communication model. So key features of a linear communication model: it is a one-way communication, meaning to say we have a speaker and the receiver will only receive the message coming from the speaker. It doesn't talk about the feedback coming from the receiver. So usually, linear model of communication is used in mass communication, okay, where the feedback is not given right away. Examples of mass communication, once again, we have radio programs. In radio programs, the broadcasters are only giving us information about a particular news story, and we don't have means of providing them feedbacks right away. So in linear model of communication, senders send message and receivers only receive. There's no feedback at all, and concept of noise is dependent on what medium. Okay. The pros of linear model of communication, good at audience persuasion and propaganda setting, because they don't have to wait for feedbacks or negative feedbacks about the information that they're trying to relay. That's why it is good for propaganda setting or for persuading someone to believe in them, because they're only laying out information to us. And then intentional result, which is to relay the information. The cons of linear model of communication. Communication is not continuous, as no concept of feedback, just like what I'm trying to tell you a while back. No way to know if communication was effective. So you can't know if communication is effective because you don't receive any feedback at all. Okay, so let us have examples of linear model of communication. So we have Lasswell's model. So this model is developed by Harold Lasswell from the name itself, which simply describes the process of communication in this phrase. Who says what in which channel, to whom, with what effect. So this has been probably known as the Lasswell formula and is translated in the graphic that we have right now. Okay, so we have the who is the sender, the source, and then what is the message, in which medium or in which channel, and to whom the message is intended to, and what will be the effect of the message to everyone, involving the sender and also the receiver. The Lasswell model of communication provides basic elements of communication process: the communicator, the message, medium, receiver, and effect. This model is linear and lacks the element of feedback, which is why this is why it is included under the umbrella of linear communication model. Okay. However, this model is still very applicable in many communication situations. So, can you think of examples of Lasswell model of communication? So please write it down. Okay, let's proceed then with the next one. So the next model under linear model of communication is Aristotle's model of communication. So it is the earliest model, and it is from the proponent is Aristotle at around 5 BC. In this model, Aristotle explains that speakers should adjust their messages according to their audience and occasion to achieve a particular effect. Okay, that's why we have here occasion. So the message should be considered, or the occasion should be considered on what kind of message should be given to a particular group of audiences. So let us apply this in the modern example. After the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor in December 7, 1941, then US President Franklin Roosevelt delivered a stirring speech to declare a war on Japan on December 8 of the same year. The speaker in this case was US President Franklin Roosevelt, and his speech was crafted especially for the occasion, filled with strong words that were crisp and straight to the point. The occasion was the US President's response to the attack of Pearl Harbor. Ito yon. Okay? And the main audience was the US Congress. And the effect was to persuade the members of the Congress to declare war against Japan, which they did, and with only one dissenting vote. These components of speaker, message, occasion, and audience, and effect should be considered when communicating one's message. So your message, your choice of words, your verbal and non-verbal cues should be dependent on the type of audience that you have in order for you to come up with a favorable effect. So let's say you want to talk with an officer versus the way you talk with a friend. So you should be adjusting your message depending on the occasion. Okay, so you should adjust the tone of your message depending on the occasion, depending on the types of listeners that you have in a particular occasion. So let's say if you are talking with or having a speech together with members of the Congress, for instance, are you going to crack a lot of jokes in front of them? So probably not, because the occasion does not tell you to crack jokes in, let's say, a congressional meeting and so on. Okay, so that's why Aristotle's model of communication is very important as well. Important model to know in order for us to try to think first and plan first before talking to a particular audience. So criticisms of Aristotle's model. So there are few criticisms around this model. Some of them are: there is no concept of feedback, once again, since it is linear model. It is one way from speaker to audience. There is no concept of communication failure like noise and barrier. Okay, so that is not being perceived at all. So in Aristotle's model, senders will always think that their message is received the way they want it to be received, and there's no barriers nor noises at all. This model can only be used in public speaking. Okay, so that is linear model of communication. This time, let us proceed with Berlow's model of communication. So the elements included in this Berlow's model of communication are also called SMCR model, which stands for source, message, channel, and receiver. Okay, so under this model of communication, the source is also called the sender or the speaker, and the source should have the following. Okay, they should have proper communication skill, proper attitude, enough knowledge on the subject matter, social system, and they may also get their ideas on the culture. Okay, and still under SMCR, we have message. It is the content, the element, treatment, structure, and what is being decoded. Then we have the channel. So there are different means of communicating a message to someone, and they may be able to receive the message by hearing it, by looking at it, by touching, smelling, or tasting it. And then it will be decoded by the receiver. And of course, they will be able to receive the message if they have the proper communication skills, attitude, knowledge, social system, and culture, understanding of culture related to it. Okay, so this model of communication shows the active process of exchange or transmitting messages from the source to the receiver via different channels. However, for a complete transmission of message, it is important that the communicator, both the communicator and the receiver should have particular set of skills in order for them to have better or effective communication, understanding of each other. This time, let's proceed with the criticisms of SMCR. So there is no concept of feedback once again, so the effect is not considered. There is no concept of noise or any kind of barriers in communication. It is a linear model of communication. There is no two-way communication. So there's no feedback as mentioned in the first bullet. Both of the people must be similar according to all above factors mentioned. Okay, they have to be similar because the elements of barriers or noise are not considered here. Okay, so in order for them to fully understand each other, I'm talking about the speaker and the receiver, they should have similar set of skills, almost similar set of skills. Okay, so that is once again the linear model of communication. That's the first general model of communication. This time, let's proceed with the transactional model of communication. So when we say transactional, these are the key features. Used for interpersonal communication, that is, the sender and the receiver exchanges ideas, messages with each other. And at the same time, both the sender and the receiver interchange roles. When we say interchange roles, the sender, the original sender, will become receiver later on, and the receiver later on will also become sender. For instance, when the sender sent a message to the receiver, and when the receiver provided a feedback, that's the time that the receiver has become the sender. Okay, because the feedback of the receiver is also his or her message to the original sender. Kaya both of the parties will become sender and receivers at the same time or simultaneously. Okay, so there will be simultaneous feedback, answer, let's say answer and questions. Okay, and context of environment and noise are considered. Feedback is taken as a new message. As I tried to tell you a while back, the feedback is also considered the message in this type of model of communication. Okay, good things about transactional model: simultaneous, and the feedback is instant, and no discrimination between sender and receiver. Negative things or not so good things about it: it encourages nonverbal communication, and more noise due to communicators talking at the same time. Okay, although this disadvantages of transactional model of communication can be lessened, okay, if we know how to communicate properly. So transactional model of communication is the exchange of messages between sender and receiver, where each take turns to send the message or receive the message. Here, both sender and receiver are known as communicators, and their roles reverses each time in the communication process, as both processes of sending and receiving occurs at the same time. So this is what transactional model looks like. So we will begin with the sender here on the left side of our screen, and then they will send a message through a particular channel, and the receiver will decode it, and by that time the original receiver will become sender as well, because they will have their feedback or slash their message to the original sender, which became at that time the receiver of the communication process. So criticisms of transactional model: without verbal response, the sender cannot be sure that the receiver got the message as intended. Feedback is an important component in the communication process, especially in interpersonal communication, as it gives a space to clarify misunderstanding. Transactional model gives the opportunity for a lot of noise because communication is simultaneous. Okay, so they might not hear each other well, or they might not interpret the message properly. Okay, because they are talking at the same time, they are thinking at the same time, so few informations might be overlooked, few informations might not be expressed properly. For example, when many people are talking at the same time in a meeting, the objective of the meeting will not be fulfilled. Okay, so differences between transactional model and other communication models. So transactional model used for interpersonal communication. On the other models, used for intrapersonal, interpersonal, group, or mass communication, depending on what is their purpose. Okay, senders and receivers are known as communicators. They interchange their roles. And on the other hand, on the other model, senders and receivers are different people. Okay, so pag sender ka, in other model, sender ka na until the end. If you're receiver, you will be receiver until the end. Includes the role of context and environment. Role of context and environment are not mentioned in other models. Transactional model includes noise and communication barriers as factors, which is true. However, in other models, they do not consider the concept of noise or barriers at all. Okay. Transactional model talks about nonverbal communication. On the other hand, other models ignores nonverbal communication. So because they are only considering the message right away. And transactional model, feedback is simultaneous, And on other models, feedback comes later in interaction model, and it's not included in linear model. Let's proceed. So the first example of transactional model of communication is this Shanner-Weaver's model of communication. Shanner-Weaver's model of communication was created by Claude Shannon and Warren Weaver from the name of this model. Okay. According to the website communicationtheory.org, Shannon and Weaver wrote an article in Bell System Technological Journal entitled A Mathematical Theory of Communication. This is also often called, or communication, according to them, is often called telephone model. Okay, or this model also called telephone model, since it was developed because of technology of telephone and the experience of noise coming from the switchboard. So originally, this Shannon-Weaver's model is from their experiences, the way communication takes place in whenever one is communicating through telephones, because they usually experience noise, okay, literally in the process of communication. So the sender would be the person giving the message, while the encoder would be the transmitter, which converts the message into signals. Let us use the modern example of mobile phones for this Shannon-Weaver's model. With our modern example, the encoder would be the cell phone, and the sender, of course, would be the person calling. The encoder, on the other hand, would be um, the reception place of the signal, which converts signals into a message, which is why in modern parlays, when there is no signal, there is difficulty in decoding the message. The receiver would not be the destination of the message by the sender, which would be the person who is being called. And when there are problems like that, or that's what we call them now as noise, that interferes with the message, then the receiver would give feedback, or usually they will say choppy, 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 because they can hear the message. When the message cannot be heard because of the signal, the messages are transferred through the use of a channel. The case of the telephone or your cell phone, the channel would be cables, etc. Okay. This model can also be used in other situations and can tell us how message may sometimes get lost because of noise, which can be physical or psychological, or how feedback is essentially component of oral communication to ensure that message is successfully received. On the other hand, when it comes to um, other models, they do not consider noise at all, di ba? So Shannon-Weaver's model is very important in knowing how to communicate properly, because you have to consider the different barriers of communication. If you want to convey your message effectively, then anticipate that there might be barriers of communication. And if you were able to properly anticipate the different barriers of communication, then you might be willing to do something in order for you to lessen those barriers of communication. Let's say in classroom, if you think that one barrier of communication is the noisiness of other students, then you may want to ask the students to pay attention, to only listen to you. Or if you want someone to decode your message right away, then you may want to talk with that person personally in order for you to avoid different types of noises or barriers of communication, and so on. Okay, this time let's proceed with the next model of communication. Which is the interactional model of communication. So interactional model of communication, these are the features used for new communications like internet. Slower feedbacks in turn, concepts of field of experience known as convergence model. Communication becomes linear if receiver does not respond. Good things about it, feedback is even in mass communication, there are new communication channels. And cons, feedback can take a very long time. Sender receiver might not know who the other person is. Let's proceed. Concepts of interactive model. So in interactive model, whenever a source sends a message to a receiver, she encodes the message first. The encoded message is then received by the receiver, where it is decoded to get the original information. Again, the receiver acts as the source, encodes another message, and sends it back to the sender. So difference between interactive model and other models of communication. So interactive model, indirect and slow feedback. Other models of communication, direct and fast feedback. Feedback is a whole new process of communication for interactive model. However, for others, feedback is part of a single communication process. In interactive model, there are different mediums or media used. For other models of communication, for all other kinds of media like prints and news, it is limited to the traditional ones. Okay, so let us have example of this interactive model. Okay, so Schramm's model of communication. So in this model, pay attention to the role of the interpreter. Okay. Encoding and decoding are not automatic process. Both go through the filter of interpretation. Therefore, the message may not succeed or may succeed at the same time, based on interpreters' appreciation of the message. There are times when the sender and the receiver may apply different meanings to the same message. So in this model, in Schramm's model of communication, which is illustrated by Wilbur Schramm, there will always be two circles represented. Okay, so the first circle talks about the field of experience of the source, and the second circle will be the source or the field of experience of the destination. And if they have similar field of experiences, then that will be their signal, and that is where communication will take place. By the way, what do you mean by field of experience? So field of experience is the things or are the things that influences the understanding and interpretation. That's why interpretation is very important in interpersonal interactive model. Interpretation of message like culture, social background, belief, experiences, and values. Okay, so when someone shares about his or her experience and the other person also has similar experience, then they will be able to understand each other. Okay, advantages of this model. Circular communication gives opportunity to both parties to give their opinion since they have experiences about the subject matter. As it is dynamic and ever-changing model, it is helpful in general practice. Sender and receiver interchanges and both are actually active. And the semantic noise included as concept helps in understanding problems that can occur during the interpretation of the message. Okay, feedbacks made it easier to know if the message is interpreted by the receiver as intended or not. So since they are talking with each other, the sender and the receiver or the source and the destination are talking with each other, if the destination did not provide a feedback that is appropriate with what is being shared, then they will know right away if there is misunderstanding. Okay, concept of interpretation makes communication effective. Field of experience psychological effect helps to understand communication process in many other ways than the traditional ones. Let's continue. So this model cannot be dealt with multiple levels of or I'm sorry, this model cannot deal with multiple levels of communication and complex communication processes. There can only be two sources communicating. Many sources implicates the process and the model cannot be implemented. Message sent and received might be interpreted differently than intended. So these are the disadvantages. Although the advantages will overshadow this disadvantages because the feedback is given right away, and if there are messages interpreted differently, then they will still be able to correct those. Okay, this time let us have these aspects of communication that I have presented a while back. So communication is integrated in all parts of our lives. So may it be in academics, professional, personal, or civic. So there will always be communication, and communication is very important in all of these aspects of our lives. May it be in school, may it be in work, may it be at home, or may it be in the community, civic. Communication needs, uh, communication meets our needs. So physical needs, so the need to communicate, keep our bodies and mind functioning. Basically, communication alerts others that our physical needs are not being met. Let's say we can tell someone that we are hurt, that we are sick by the use of communication, um, by communicating it to other people. So instrumental needs, relational needs, and identity needs. Next, communication is guided by culture and context. O'Neill defines culture as the full range of learned human behavior patterns. It includes knowledge, beliefs, art, law, custom, and other capabilities and habits acquired by man as a member of the society. That's why, as I mentioned about that, context is very important in communication. Context is the circumstance that forms the setting of an event, statement, or idea in terms of which it can be fully understood. So we will be able to fully understand a particular message, particular person, if we know the context behind. Communication is learned. We are born with the capacity to learn a language and ability to communicate. And we develop our communication skills. And that is very important because if we know how to communicate properly and effectively, then if you are not yet as good as others, then you should have the ability to learn. Okay. Other manners of communication varies from one person to another. Communication is learned through human contact. Okay. So as we communicate with each other, we also develop our communication skills. The more we talk with other people, the more that we enhance our transactional, our interactional skills. Because you won't be able to enhance your communication skills if you're not talking with others. Okay, let's say in delivering your reports in front of uh, your your classmates, in presenting your reports to your clients in the future. So the more that you practice doing those things, the more that you learn more about those. Next, communication has ethical implication. So communication ethics deals with the process of negotiating and reflecting on our actions and communication regarding what we believe to be right or wrong. In communication ethics, we are concerned with the decisions people make about what is right or wrong. Okay? According to Aristotle, we should act to the right extent and to the at the right time and the right motive and the right way. Next, we have different types of communication. So we have the first one, verbal communication, use of words and symbols in representing ideas or objects, which comes in two forms, may it be oral or may it be written. It includes face-to-face interaction or online interaction with the other person, speaking to someone on the phone, participating in meetings, delivering speeches in programs, and giving lectures or presentations in conferences. That is all verbal communication. So, written communication uses symbols that are handwritten, printed with an electronic device na nakikita natin. It includes letters, memos, bulletins, reports, manuals, emails, what else? Blogs. So these are common examples of written communication. What else? Newspapers, books, magazines. These are written communication. So factors that affect verbal communication, tone of voice. Though the tone of voice will actually affect how the receiver will perceive or will receive the sentences, the message that we are trying to relay. Pwedeng galit ka, pero with the tone of voice that you have, they might not consider you as angry at that particular time. Or there will be situations where you're not angry at all. However, they thought that you are angry because of your tone of voice. So it affects verbal communication. Use of descriptive words. So choice of words are very important in communication because they might misinterpret something, misunderstood something if we don't use the appropriate words whenever we are talking with someone. Emphasis on a certain phrases is also another factor that affects verbal communication, and of course the volume of your voice. In terms of intercultural communication, there are language barriers which are affected by verbal forms of communication. Miscommunication may occur between two or more parties if words, just like what I mentioned, are not properly chosen and used in communication. Hence, effective verbal communication is dependent on several factors and cannot be fully isolated from other language skills. Okay, the following aids in the process of communication in order for us to avoid misunderstanding or miscommunication. Clarity of speech is very important. State of calmness and focus, politeness, and ethics. Another type of communication is nonverbal communication. It is a form of communication which refers to the sending of messages to another person using methods or means other than spoken language. Okay? Basically, it is sending or receiving messages in a variety of ways without use of words. So, ano to mga to, facial expressions, body language, and so on. We'll see in the next slides. So, nonverbal communication, most communicators are not conscious of these nonverbal cues because these cues may be both intentional and unintentional. Okay? Nonverbal messages produced by body, and another category of nonverbal communication will be nonverbal messages produced by broad settings such as time, space, and silence. We'll see. Examples of nonverbal cues. Intonation. We have talked about that. Facial expression, pause, hand gestures, use of visuals, body movement, and eye contact. Okay. So another examples of nonverbal communication, but not limited to the following. Touch may also give a message. A glance will also give different messages. So a glance may be interpreted as having interest with someone, or a glance may also mean that a particular person is looking after you or has suspicions on you. Eye contact is also another nonverbal cue. May it be eye contact to give us clues, eye contact to show us their sincerity, eye contact that will show us that we are not sincere, that we are lying. So these are nonverbal cues for different occasions. The volume of voice, let's say volume, we have lower volume of voice. Example, probably you are keeping a secret, that's why you don't want it to be heard by a lot of people, or your volume of voice may also mean that you are probably angry or weak, and so on. Okay, proximity will also tell us a message. So the nearer we are to a person, the closer figuratively we are with that person. Okay, or the relationship with that particular person is closer if we are literally physically closer with them. Okay, just like for example, for lovers, they're very close with each other. For friends, they're closer but not as close as lovers. On the other hand, we have professionals. Of course, they keep a particular distance from each other. And we have other examples of nonverbal cues here. Posture will also tell us a particular message. Let's say you are interested in talking with someone. Posture will let that person know that you're interested, or your posture will also indicate that you're not interested with that person. Let's say you're slouching while the other person's talking, or you're facing other direction while talking with that person, may indicate that you're not interested with what he or she is talking about. Okay, formality or informality, that's also another nonverbal cue. Next, still other examples of nonverbal communication. Posture, appearance. Okay, so your appearance, sabi dito, will also be a message to someone. So let's say you are untidy, you are neat, you look presentable, the way you present yourself will give message to someone. No? Head movements, let's say nodding, okay, shaking one's head, or nonverbal communication. Movements, hand movements, waving or pointing at something. Let's say you point at a particular place when someone asks you where is, let's say, Tarlac City, and then you point into that direction, then they will know where is Tarlac City, and that is your message to them. Eye contact, facial expressions, body contact, closeness, and sounds, so volume or intonation. Okay, so multiple functions of nonverbal communication used to repeat verbal message. Okay, let's say to point an object while saying it. Once again, example, when someone asks where is Tarlac State University, where's the way in order for me to go to Tarlac State University. So when you're going to say, you will have to go in that corner. So while saying those words, go in that corner or turn in that particular corner, you're also pointing at that particular corner. So it repeats verbal message. Or let's say you're describing the size of a particular person. Let's say you will describe a person as tall, then of course you will have a hand gesture of a person being tall. Okay. Next, nonverbal function of nonverbal or multiple function of nonverbal communication. Second will be often used to accent a verbal message. Verbal tone indicates the actual meaning of words, or to give emphasis with the verbal message. Okay. Once again, if you're angry, then it should be evident as well with your tone, with the volume of your voice. Hindi pwedeng galit ka pero kahina-hina pa din ng boses mo. So what will happen? They might not interpret it as you're already angry. No. So how are you going to let them know that you're angry? Okay, if you're not really showing them through the use of nonverbal cues. Next, other functions often complements the verbal message but may also contradict. Okay, let's say your facial expressions, okay, may reinforce something about your message. Let's say you're telling someone that you are sad, then your facial expression should also be showing that you're indeed sad. Okay? Hindi yung you're sad, you're telling someone that you're sad, and yet you're smiling. Okay? Next, regulate interactions. Non-verbal cues convey when the person should speak or not. Hand gestures may signal a person to speak. When we directed our palms to someone, so it means that we are accepting their ideas, or we are recognizing that specific person to talk. Okay? May substitute for verbal message, especially if it is blocked by noise or interruption. Let's say they can't hear our verbal message, then why not use hand gestures or facial expressions? Halimbawa na lang, still sa kalye, pag may nagtanong sa atin, since maraming dumadaan ng mga sasakyan, baka hindi kayo magkarinigan. So you will just point on a particular direction in order for you to help the other person asking for direction. Or just like the example in the previous slide, saying okay to someone by use of hand gesture, thumbs up. Okay, they will already know that it's okay. Okay, this time let's proceed with the principles of communication. The first one is principle of clarity. So these principles of communication are very important in order for us to make sure that the message we intended for other people to receive will be received the way we want them to receive it. Okay, the information or message should be coded or worded clearly. There should be no ambiguity in the message for it to be understood. If a message is written, it should be writer responsible, and if it is spoken, it should be speaker responsible. So we should be clear with the message that we want to convey. Next, principle of attention. Receiver's attention should be drawn to the message to make communication effective. They should be able to receive it, in short. And we should be able to minimize the barriers if there is. People are different in several aspects, like their behavior, attention, emotion, preference, culture, belief, and principles. So they respond differently to the message. So we should know the type of audience that we're going to talk with in order for us to know if they will pay attention to the message that we're trying to convey. Principle of feedback. Feedback guarantees the satisfaction of sender. In the situation when message or medium requires improvement, the feedback is necessary to make the sender informed about the adjustment of the communication process. So it is important, knowing the principle of feedback, we should always give an effort to provide feedback to someone in order for them to know whether they're going to convince you more, or if they're going to stop talking with you, or whether they're going to improve something, and they will be able to know those if you give them feedback. Principle of formality or informality. No? So in business or professional context, formal communication is generally used for transmitting messages and other information. However, informal communication may be effective in situations when formal communication may not achieve its desired result. So meaning to say, there will be times that we have to be formal, there will be times that we will have to be informal, depending on the function, depending on the occasion, depending on the person we are talking with. Principle of consistency. This principle states that communication should always be consistent with the policies, plans, programs, and objectives of organization and not in conflict with them. So it will also fall under the principle of clarity. So the message should be clear and consistent. Principle of timeliness. This principle states that communication should be done in real time so that it can help in implementing plans. It will help the sender. It will also help the receiver. And definitely the message will be um, encoded and decoded depending on the time a particular message was sent, when a particular message was received. Principle of adequacy. So the communicated information should be adequate and complete in all aspects. Okay, so we should not be giving incomplete messages to someone, because if we provided incomplete information to others, there might be um, different objectives there. If we provide them incomplete information, that will lead to misinformation. If we provided incomplete information, that might lead to deceit as well. So provide adequate or enough information. Okay, communication ethics this time. Communication ethics deals with the behavior of an individual or group which is governed by their morals and in turn affects communication. It is integrated into academics, professional, personal, and civic contexts. Communication has broad ethical implications. In a fast-changing mode of communication, one should take the importance of ethical listening, avoiding plagiarism, presenting evidences ethically, and applying ethical standards to mass media and social media. Communication ethics. The National Communication Association, or NCA's creed for ethical communication was approved by NCA's Legislative Council in 1999, and it reminds us that ethics is relevant across contexts and applies to every channel of communication. So we should be respectful to the ideas of other people. That's what we mean by ethics. We should not be giving out information that is not ours to give. The Council stipulates that ethical communication is fundamental to responsible thinking, decision making, and the development of relationships and communities within and across contexts, cultures, channels, and media. Moreover, ethical communication enhances human worth and dignity by fostering truthfulness, fairness, responsibility, personal integrity, and respect for self and others. So when we say communication ethics, um, we should ask permission first before we get particular information, or before we share particular information to others. We should not be getting ideas of others without telling them, without asking permission. And these are only few communication or ethical uh, principles that we have to consider whenever we are communicating with someone. Just like what I mentioned a while back, we should not be giving out information that is not ours to give. Okay, so these are few examples of few principles of communication ethics. Okay, and we should be considerate with the different contexts considerate with the different cultures of others, we should be responsible with the things that we say. Okay, so these are once again the different processes, models of communication. And keep these types of processes, models, elements of communication in order for us to effectively communicate our ideas to other people, and in order for us to avoid misunderstandings in the academe, in our profession, at home, or in our community. Okay, so that is for communication. Thank you so much and take care. God bless. Bye bye.